Okay, this video is, are blacks and whites doomed to hypertension? Okay, when I was a medical student resident, I sort of taught that black people just have lots of hypertension and there's not much you can do about it. It's of unknown cause, essential hypertension, and it's really sad, and lots of them at a young age end up in kidney failure and have strokes, and what are you going to do? They're probably salt retainers and there's not much you could do. And Caucasians, they just get lots of hypertension as they get older and nobody knows why, and it's sad, and these are the recommended pills. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what's really going on. Hypertension in blacks is very common, super common. And I can tell you, I've walked through dialysis facilities sometimes where almost every single patient was black and had a lot of hypertension, a lot of diabetes, a lot of autoimmune disease in women. I've seen a lot of lupus as a cause of hypertension. Now, this is just a paper here showing, from 2018, showing blacks had a very high incidence of stroke-related hypertension, about 3 times the rate of Caucasians in this study, and a couple studies that actually it mentions. And if only hypertension could be controlled, they'd have much less strokes, much less kidney failure, and death from heart disease as well. Okay, so here's where it starts to get interesting. There was a research paper from 1929 by this guy Donison in the Lancet Journal where he checked the blood pressures of a whole bunch of people in Kenya, okay? And there was like no hypertension. If it's genetic, how come there wasn't a bunch of hypertension in Kenya? Okay, because it's not really genetic. All right, I'm gonna go through the next paper, which is gonna be great. We're gonna summarize the whole history of sodium and hypertension. But okay, what does this one show? It shows in a hospital with 1,800 patients admitted, there was not a single case of hypertension, not one. They also then talked about autopsy studies. They almost never see a hypertrophied heart unless there's some other disease happening there. Hyperpaesia is just a way of saying chronic essential hypertension. And so they said it certainly is a disease of civilization because it's just not occurring where they ate the old-fashioned plant-based diet. Okay, next slide I think is really good. All right, so this paper here, Salt and Hypertension, an Evolutionary Perspective. Author's name is Vachihi Batuman, so you can easily look this one up if you want. It's in the Journal of Hypertension from 2012. All right, so this will be quite interesting. So what's the point? There's tons of sodium in processed food. Processed food is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Lots of sodium is used for preserving meats, for making meat taste better, for the seasonings on meat and animal product foods. They put a lot of sodium into all kinds of processed food, even into soda pop. There's sodium in milk. All right, so anyways, the point about this from a so-called evolutionary historical perspective is humans used to live with no added salt, zero to their diet. For almost all of recorded history, other than the last 200 years, sodium has been very scarce. That's where all these terms come from, like the Romans paid a salarium, a salary, paid in salt. That's what, the word salt. Okay, hypertension keeps going up and up and up because people are eating more and more sodium. Okay, so looking at this part, he talks about how rare salt used to be. And then he talks about in native populations without salt added to their diet, they're usually eating around 250 milligrams or less of sodium per day. And you can look at the Yanomamo in Amazon jungle here, the Yanomami. They eat, it's thought, 250 milligrams. I think I recall a paper where they thought less than that. And there's no hypertension, zero. Saltless society, zero hypertension, where they're eating salt and they're eating plants, okay? It just doesn't even happen. How much more could you want? Almost everybody ends up getting hypertensive in a Western society where they eat high sodium, and almost no one gets hypertension where they don't. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that in terms of a clear-cut result. Okay, so they said that humans are now eating, depending on the amount, 50, 70 times more sodium than they're supposed to. What's not widely recognized is when sodium goes up in the diet from meat and processed food, potassium comes down because potassium, P for potassium, P for plants. And the other little secret is right in the center of chlorophyll, take a look at a picture of it. Right in the center of it is magnesium. Those are vasodilators. Potassium and magnesium are the vasodilators. So when you eat the plants, you get the stuff that lowers your blood pressure, keeps you healthy. When you eat the meat and the processed food, you get the sodium with the lack of the other two, and you end up hypertensive, fat, and sick. I show you this though because there's a lot of liars out there. This guy Taubes is one of the biggest liars, writing all these papers saying hypertension's not that big a deal. There's another guy who's become pretty well known now on the internet. He's a pharmacology PhD or something, researcher, and he's writing books that say that, oh, it's good to increase your sodium. These are not true. I'm letting you know that, and you can read this article for yourself. That's why I'm giving you this entire reference, so you can look this up if you're curious about it. I can also tell you this guy McGregor is good, and I'll just tell you, in terms of philosophy of sodium, there are the people who really think it's a big deal and sodium is quite bad. That would include Walter Kempner, MD, genius of nutrition, and myself, okay, and this Dr. McGregor, all right? Now, there's the intermediate camp. That would be like Dr. McDougall and Dr. Pritikin. And so with Dr. McDougall and Dr. Pritikin, where they're coming from is that sodium reduction, you know, just by avoiding processed food, you dramatically lower your sodium. And by eating plant foods, you dramatically increase your potassium and your magnesium. And that guy, Richard Moore, MD, PhD, the guy who wrote High Blood Pressure Solution, I have that in my list of recommended books, which I made like about a week ago. That's the best book ever written on hypertension and on, you know, cell function, the membrane ion pumps, and it helps you understand the brain as well as hypertension. But the bottom line is this. Hypertension, sodium is a really big deal, but if you increase your potassium, you decrease the effect of the sodium. So that's one issue. And I think what McDougall and Pritikin are sort of saying is you get most of the benefit just by getting rid of the meat and the processed food and eating plant foods. And just in so doing, your sodium comes down enough, your potassium and magnesium come up enough that you're going to get pretty good results. And that's nice. But where I'm coming from is I'm not seeking to be good. I don't want to just be healthier than the average person. I want to be the best I can be. I don't want little silent strokes in my brain like I see hundreds of every day, okay? And I want to be as good as I can be. And so what I mean by that is I want to try to perfect my diet to the extent that's possible. So I want to figure out what's the best way to handle this. And I think the best way to handle it is, like I said before, you know, be like Adam and Eve, but with indoor heating and plumbing. And so I don't want any extra sodium if I can avoid it. What McDougall says is, hey, lots of people, they're not going to eat plant foods unless you let them put more salt on their food to make it taste better. Okay, that's fine. If that's what some people need, that's fine. Because, you know, most people, they're quite ignorant and they're just like, it's hard to get them to do anything. So that's fine. But I'm going through this epidemiology data, research data to show you that there's good evidence for the real low salt path. And I actually personally think that it makes your brain function better because everything in your brain is dependent on these ion pumps, all right? You know, the average neuron in your brain uses 2/3 of its energy to run the potassium sodium ATPase, membrane ion pump, okay? So I don't want to mess with that. I want to give it what it appears designed to do. Okay, so the Yanomami and the Amazon, only about 250 milligrams of sodium per day per this study, less from my other reading about them. There's a guy in 1995 here, Derek Denton, did a chimpanzee study, and he found when he feeds the chimps a high salt diet, they all get hypertension. When he takes them off the high sodium diet, their hypertension goes away. And another thing that Kempner said is, you don't get that big a difference if you drop sodium, let's say, from 10 grams a day to 3 grams a day. He says where you really see a difference is when you go from, let's say, about 3 grams a day down to 500 milligrams a day or even less. And Kempner had some of his patients on as low as, I think, like about 150 milligrams a day of sodium, really, really low. But he followed them closely. So a regular person should not do that on their own. But under close medical supervision, he was getting patients with systolics of 250, down to 120 and whatnot. So he had a longer way to go, and he was much more meticulous in that sense. They've shown in rats, the Wistar research rats, that they'll get fibrous tissue, being accumulating in their heart and their kidneys, which is damaging to the heart and their kidney, even without that much hypertension. And one of the points I'll make, I'm going to do a separate lecture in the future about the microvascular changes, thickening of the capillary basement membrane due to hypertension and diabetes, which is a big deal to me with regard to the brain because it progressively lessens the ability for oxygen to be delivered to the brain tissue, leading to neuronal cell death, dementia. All right, so I think hypertension is a big deal. All right, and then here's the other thing. Here's the typical academic joke you'll get coming out of the Ivy League schools. That's why you have to remember this. You're on your own when it comes to this stuff. Almost no doctor knows this stuff. And the big Ivy universities that set all the guidelines, they don't know what they're talking about. The DASH study, dietary approach to stop hypertension. Look at what a joke this is. The intermediate sodium reduction diet was 6 grams per day. The low sodium diet was 4 grams per day, when we're designed to probably eat about, let's say, 200 milligrams a day. So, I mean, it's like orders of magnitude more than that, okay? That's, it's so high, it's not even funny. So what I'm saying is, basically, their research is close to worthless. If you automatically assume that people are such morons and that there's nothing you could do, you're never going to get good results. And that's why I think, if you want to study athletic performance, study national champions and Olympic champions. If you want to study a population that reduces hypertension, study ones like the Yanomamo with none. Study somebody like Kempner with the best results ever. That's how you really learn stuff, okay? And so the whole point of it is our bodies are designed for an environment where there's no added salt, which is probably around 200, 250 milligrams a day. And we're also designed to be eating tons of potassium and magnesium per day. Richard Moore said that he thinks you need to eat at least 5 times as much potassium as you do sodium, which happens automatically on a plant-based diet, but I would think it's even more than that. The good news is it's easy to do. Just don't add salt to your food, eat a plant-based diet, and you should make fantastic progress, and then avoid all these fats. That's the other thing I've seen getting a lot of people stuck in the rut of not being able to lower their cholesterol as much as they want, not being able to lower their blood pressure as much as they want, is they're still eating a lot of fat. All this nonsense about you need, omega-3s. I personally think that's BS, just so you know. And all these other high-fat foods that are recommended, I don't like them. I don't think nuts are going to help your cardiovascular health. None of these oils are all bad, in my opinion. I would stay away from all this high-fat stuff. Avocados. Fat makes your blood thick, and it increases your blood pressure. Okay, so McGregor, his research references here. If you want to look up McGregor, McGregor's book is here. He's real good on hypertension. I've read his work. Denton's research on the chimpanzees is here. The Yanomamos in purple. So anyways, the whole point of this was, modern blacks in America, they tend to eat high sodium diet with a lot of fat. Okay, and the other Americans, the Caucasians, they also do the same thing. They're eating lots of meat, lots of oil, lots of sodium. So they just get hypertensive. And I'm going to talk about this in a separate lecture, but the sooner you get your act together, the better. Because the longer you go on with being markedly hypertensive, diabetic, and all these things, the more likely you're going to start having irreversible problems. So anyways, I thought this was good. So you get the truth on sodium, and you can't be tricked into eating high salt diet.